Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this new edition of this Zenith Zoom briefing. We have a Turkey topic with fantastic expert on it, a very specific topic, but one which you will see has much larger ramifications, even to the very actual news that we're seeing the last days. I would like to welcome our esteemed panelist. I would like to welcome Dr. Ilke Tolgur. She is a professor of political science at the University Carlos III of Madrid and a European affairs analyst at the Elcano Royal Institute in Madrid. Welcome, Ilke.
Thank you very much.
I would also like to welcome Galip Dalai. He is a fellow at the Brookings Doha Center and the Richard von Weizsäcker Fellow at the Robert Bosch Academy at the moment. Both of you are also fellows at the Mercator.
Yeah, CAT fellow.
Mercator fellows, exactly. And this is the moment I want to use to thank also Stiftung Mercator, who is supporting our Kenneth Foundation and Zenith Magazine with covering a lot of EU and Germany related Turkish topics this year. Some of them we already covered in this latest issue of our magazine. I recommend you to check it out, not least because there's a fantastic interview I had with Galip Dalai in it. And we also have an upcoming issue where we follow up on these topics. And also Ronald, you will be also among the people present in that issue. Now, we have three different layers that we want to disentangle a bit in our introducing interventions. The layers are the EU-Turkey relations, the the Turkey-Greece relations, and the very specific Cyprus relations. So we work ourselves from the inner to the outside, and we would start with the Cyprus file. And I would like you to give us maybe a little wrap up because Cyprus, for some time, it seemed like on a way to be a success story and the latest example of European integration, actually, and Mediterranean integration. And then it somewhat fell apart. And the last thing we heard was President Erdogan in Cyprus saying, okay, this didn't work. We need a two-state solution. So can you give us a short wrap up? What's happened in the Cyprus issue that's been going on for over 40 years? And what's the status quo right now?
Thank you very much for the invitation. Actually, I will try to connect a bit the three dimensions or three layers you have been talking about, because I think the Cyprus issue is an interesting dossier in the crossroads for all these relations that you have been mentioning. When we look at Turkey-EU relations, you already know that accession negotiations are officially frozen. Turkey is mainly treated as a third country rather than a candidate country. And the essence of the relationship is mostly turned towards the foreign policy dimension, thanks to the tensions in the Eastern Mediterranean. So when we talk about the Eastern Mediterranean, we see that Greece and Cyprus are coming in as two very important member states. And the relationship between Turkey and these member states are crucially important for also Turkey-EU relations in a bigger sense. So what happens with Greece and what happens with Cyprus, what happens in the Cyprus dossier are very important for Turkey-EU relations for the broader picture. This is why I would like to underline this, and I would like to I wish to get more attention to the Cyprus issue and what might come out of that during my speech. We already know that 2021 has been a year of reconciliation. Turkey decided to recalibrate its foreign policy. There are various reasons for that. And Cyprus dossier was an exception. I will come to that, but I just wanted to talk on a little bit more on the differences between 2020 and 2021 and what has changed for Turkey and why the attitude towards the Cyprus dossier stayed kind of the same. When we think about 2021, We are seeing as the core reason, and I think we have talked about this for a really long time, the arrival of Joe Biden in the White House. And we see this intention of rebuilding transatlantic ties and reforming multilateral institutions. And G7, G20, NATO, but also World Trade Organization, World Health Organization due to the pandemic, etc. All of these are on the table. And since Turkey's unilateral foreign policy in various theaters of power were in direct contradiction with these intention, with this global trend, Turkey slowly started to reform or started to recalibrate. I think recalibrate is a better word. Its foreign policy in the region. And Turkey was also at odds, not only with rivals, but also with allies, and even alone in the region for many analysts. And some regional initiatives, like the East Mediterranean gas forum, advanced so quickly. So Greece, Israel, or other countries in the region already advanced in their foreign policy goals due to Turkey's more unilateral foreign policy at odds with its Western allies. Of course, this recalibration had domestic reasons as well. And these reasons did not necessarily lead to stepping back in the Cyprus dossier, because we have seen like better relations with Greece. We have seen the dialogue has been built up again. We have seen better different rounds of talks between Greece and Turkey, not necessarily very successful as much as we can understand, not necessarily treating the root causes of issues as much as we can understand, but there were certain steps in the Eastern Mediterranean, and due to these steps, there were kind of a reconciliation, even if, I want to underline this over and over again, even if the problems that are on the table are not resolved after these. But the move in Cyprus dossier was kind of an exception. Like we have seen this was coming, because it's important to know that since the election of Ersin Tatar, and with all the irregularities that was already documented also by Mustafa Akıncı, his rival during these elections, we already knew that Turkey will support a two-state solution. And the supporters of two-state solution will increase their voices. This has happened already in April 2021 in Geneva, and it was already voiced by Ersin Tatar there during the talks. And then what President Erdogan has done was just kind of reinforcing Turkey's support for the two-state solution in his visit to Northern Cyprus very recently. What we should be thinking about this is that this is going to be on the table. There's these talks of partly opening of Varosha, which is in violation of United Nations Security Council resolutions, are already on the table. There is this promise of building a presidential palace and a new parliament building, which is the demonstration of state building according to Turkey, because construction is how you build the states. I'm a bit being ironic here, but this is how it is supposed to be. And this is where the state of affairs are. But the thing is, and here is very much connected to what the EU should do, and I want to spend a couple of minutes before passing the microphone to my colleagues, that there is no internal consensus in Northern Cyprus when it comes to its future. We have seen already that opposition parties have boycotted Erdogan's speech in the parliament. We have read already many activists from the island voicing their concerns, siding with finding a federal solution, claiming that they want unity. So even if the state of affairs is that we are in a deadlock because the Republic of Cyprus and the European Union do not necessarily accept two-state solution as a possible solution ahead, Turkey and the Republic of Northern Cyprus say that this is the only way ahead, at least for now, and we see a deadlock here. So for me, what is really important and what should the EU do is that they should work with all the parties involved in this discussion in Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, not just the government, even if they are not recognized. Even if it's not a recognized country, this is definitely important for the future of the island. work with bicommunal groups that look for reunification and understand better what is going on there, and come out with a convincing plan together with the Republic of Cyprus. Because at the end of the day, this is an issue that is a matter of territorial integrity for an EU member state. Like I keep on underlining this. This is not just a sidelined issue or regional conflict for the European Union. We're talking about the territorial integrity of a member state. So the impacts of solidarity or the importance of solidarity is quite important. But you cannot just talk about solidarity every time an alternative plan comes away. Otherwise, the future will be imposed on you. What do you think what you should be doing is to come out with a convincing plan together with the Republic of Cyprus, try to work that's on the other part of the island, try to work on with the opposition, the groups that are looking for reunification, and last but not least, assess all the risks and opportunities between the status quo, because status quo is an unresolved conflict for decades, and the new proposal that was given by the Turkish Cypriots and Turkish Republic, and maybe use foresight and plan ahead, as I said. Otherwise, the future will be imposed on the EU. I think I will stop there, and I can comment on any other dimensions that will come afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ilke. Ronald, I know that you not only closely follow Turkish politics, but also Greek politics. So coming over to the Greek-Turkish relation and Cyprus. So obviously we know that Greece is involved there, but in the last years we saw Greece pop up in a much larger scale in the Eastern Mediterranean, even in the Libya file, and somewhat extending its foreign policy, but also its confrontation with Turkey. So could you just like recap how also from the Greek side, foreign policy in this region changed, and what place the Cyprus issue now holds, and how that changed over the last years?
Yes, thank you very much. I should say I'm talking from Istanbul, very much in Turkey, and very much the center of political debates also in Turkey. But a biographical note might be of use. Some 35 years ago, as a young scholar, I wrote a PhD thesis on Greek policy towards Turkey, and my focus was very, very much the Cyprus issue. And actually, I came to Turkey 2 years ago to somehow fill the gap and to understand better also the narratives which are dominating also in Turkey and the Turkish strategy. So let me just introduce this. To understand the complexities, I somehow applied various levels, and I think they're very relevant if you look at Cyprus. You have the international level, and we're talking about third-party interventions. If we talk about the United States of America and the European Union, they have become a part with the Republic of Cyprus joining, but they used to be a third party. They're not that third party like anymore. Then you have the regional level, which is the Greek and Turkish governments playing a role. They are guarantee powers, which have a long history of interfering. For the listeners, we should say that ethnically, Cyprus is a mixed bag. You have a Greek Cypriot majority of about 80%, and then you have a Turkish Cypriot community. You should not use this word minority because it's problematic, but let's say community. But mathematically, it's a minority of 20% plus. Let's not be very precise about these numbers, but approximately. So that's the Greek-Turkish regional level of two neighboring countries with very strong political and strategic interest in this island. And then you have what is happening on the ground. And Ilke mentioned this. She started talking about how do the Cypriots feel, the Turkish Cypriots, how do the Greek Cypriots feel. There is a very intensive discussion, has always been, how the future of this island should look. Very briefly, things have changed dramatically, and it's a very, very dynamic situation since there was a change in power in the United States. This had a dramatic impact also on Greek-Turkish relations, in the sense that the Americans with Biden are putting their money to the Greeks, and there is an alienation between Turks and Americans. We will maybe touch on this later on. Then there has been a very, should I say, positive development in Greek-Turkish bilateral relations. We should not forget that 1 year ago, the two countries were very close to a military confrontation, and this has changed. We will have to emphasize that it was mainly an intervention, a very massive intervention of the European Union, which prevented this and which is keeping somehow the Turkish side at hold. This has a price for the Turks, and the Greeks are happy about this. So these are all elements which play a role. And maybe a last word regarding the Cypriot situation. There was an effort, another effort, very many efforts since the division of the island in 1974. And already this 74 is already debatable, because for the Turkish side, not 74, but 63 and 67 are the important dates. But let's say 74, the invasion, the military invasion, and the partition of the island into two parts. There have been numerous efforts by the United Nations Secretary General, and Antonio Guterres had its last go in April of this year. They ended without any success these talks in Geneva, once more in Geneva. And then Mr. Erdogan, a couple of weeks ago, went to Lefkoşa, to the northern part of the divided capital of Cyprus, and announced that it's only the two-state solution. Maybe we should highlight here that for the European Union, and I think Ilke made this very clear, very, very clear, that it's a matter of territorial integrity. It doesn't work. That's the international dimension. It doesn't work for the European Union. Mrs. von der Leyen says, never, never. She said, never, 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 ever, I think she said, will the European Union recognize this. So Turkey is totally isolated, but that's again the international level. Below this, on the local level, unfortunately, and that's really bad news, the efforts to find a solution between Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots have come to an end. There were much better times before. And this is maybe my last observation before I hand on to Mr. Galip Bey, who I'm very, very fond of meeting this afternoon. The Greeks, if they speak about the Cypriot history and the Cypriot developments, they use the term chamenes efkerias, lost opportunities. And if you study carefully the history of the negotiations, you will find that from a Hellenic perspective, indeed, there were better chances in the past. And the last big chance to come to a breakthrough was in 2004 with the Annan plan, which was a very, very sophisticated, a very, very big diplomatic international effort to at last put a solution to this problem. And then, unfortunately, one may say, without taking now a position, but this passed with a referendum in the Turkish Cypriot community and was rejected in the referendum on the Greek Cypriot side. And this is one of these lost opportunities. And maybe I will end with a note of optimism. For me, the optimism is that in spite of all the setbacks, and in spite of all the historic baggages Greeks and Turks carry with them, and the many disappointments and a rather horrible history, in Cyprus, majorities on both sides, on the Greek side and on the Cypriot side, believe in a unified solution, believe in some sort of a solution based on the bicommunal, bizonal federation, which is the United Nations formula. It will be up to the Cypriots in the end, maybe with the assistance of the United Nations, to find a future for this place. And then it will be up to the Europeans to support this. At this stage, the Turkish Cypriots do not accept the Europeans, because the Europeans are partisan in the sense that the Republic of Cyprus, which happens to be dominated by the Greek Cypriot side, is a member of the EU. I'll leave it there and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Ronald. Galip, in the interview you gave us for our latest issue, literally the first thing that you told me that the Turkish side was disappointed in the accession talks was the Cyprus issue. And I think not many people in Germany maybe would suggest that that this topic was so high on the agenda. Now, this year we saw re-engagement on the EU-Turkey level. It made mostly headlines for not having a seat for Ursula von der Leyen. But apart from that, what is your impression? How did that level of communication, how did that change? Did the attitude in Brussels change, or the perception that the Cyprus issue is just very high on the agenda for the Turkish side? Did it change? And how much did the Cyprus issue feature at all concerning all the other problems that are on the table right now?
Well, thank you very much. And I think like what I'm going to say is going to be quite complementary to what I have already listened to it by Ronald and by Ilke, and both of them was an excellent remarks. I mean, the Cyprus is part of a bigger package, both in Turkish-Greece relation and Turkish-European relations as well too. And recently, the crisis in Turkish Europe has been very much centered on the Eastern Mediterranean, where Cyprus is one of the sub-file, but not the file, but one of the very important file that basically poisoned the whole atmosphere of Turkish, Greek and Turkish European relations. The question is, what was the Eastern Mediterranean crisis, and what was the crisis between Turkey and Greece? When we speak about Turkey and Greece, basically when we discuss about the problems in Turkish-Greek relations, we are mainly discussing three sets of the problems. One of them is centered mostly on the Aegean, but not exclusively. There, the question over the, the length of the length of the territorial waters, the ownership of the certain isles or islets, or the and then the airspace. Those kind of things dominate the discussion. And then we have the Eastern Mediterranean, where the question over the to what extent the islands generates EEZ is the main one, the main file. And then the third one is the Cyprus. And the Cyprus is the crisis is obvious, like the Ronald and Ilke has already mentioned it very much. And the unresolved nature of the Cyprus crisis basically very much poisoned the overall atmosphere of Turkish-Greek and Turkish-European relations as well too. And there, when you look at the Turkish side, more and more the framework within which this Cyprus question needs to be addressed is changing for the Turkish side. For a long time, the idea was it was a two-state solution. It was a bi-communal, bi-zonal federal solution. But now more and more Turkey is gearing towards the idea of a two-state solution. And that I don't see just like Erdogan posturing. I see this idea of two-state solution gaining actually more real currency in Ankara. And the disciple of this idea is made up of quite disparate actors and institutions with different political backgrounds as well too. But what has happened? What has changed? Because yes, this crisis have been around for a long time, so there isn't much. There isn't nothing new on those fronts. Then why do we have this crisis, particularly the crisis of the past 1 or 2 or 3 years? Because this is the longest lasting crisis, I would argue, since the 1974, the Turkish military intervention in Cyprus. I think that the several factors was crucial. One of them is obviously the energy discussion, the energy exploration in the Eastern Mediterranean has increased the appetite of all actors, including Turkey, for the search of the energy, and that basically made what was previously a frozen conflict into a hot conflict. Because once you start doing the exploration, all the discussion about the sovereignty, about your boundaries, your maritime boundaries come into the effect. And on this energy question, I think the several factors was important. One of them is the fact that not only that there was an energy discovery, gas discovery in Eastern Mediterranean, first by Israel 2009 and 10, and then by Cyprus 2011, and then by Egypt 2015. The Zorh, the one that Egypt found, is the largest gas field in the Mediterranean to date. But then the question of how to sell this energy as well, so how to monetize this energy. And that created different structures. The two structures was important. One of them is the establishment of the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum, the Cairo-based one, and another one, the previous projection of an Eastern Mediterranean pipeline project to Europe, basically to bring the energy and gas to Europe. This pipeline project right now is largely defunct. There isn't money for this, and the level of the gas is not as big as many thought that it would be. But even despite the defunctness of these pipeline projects, the pipeline project, the realignment, the countries that was involved, the realignment that underpinned both the pipeline project and then the gas forum, increased the sense of the exclusion in Ankara from an emerging energy and security order in the Mediterranean. And the Turkish response was basically, well, I cannot put in place a new game plan, but I can make that the current game plan cannot work. I can, show to the people without Turkey being inside of this game cannot work. So in this regard, the Turkey meant to disrupt this game, not put in place an alternative game plan. And the other element in this regard that became that generated quite a tension was obviously Libya. In Libya, the several things increased the tension. One of them is the Turkey signed a maritime deal with the GNA, the UN recognized government of National Accord in Libya. And this basically clashed with the Greek idea of its maritime borders, because effectively Turkey disregarded the islands such as Crete while signing this deal. And in response, Greece signed a deal with Egypt, which Turkey basically sees this as disregarding its own projection of its maritime deal. Another dimension of in Libya, the Turkey and a set of countries engaged in a geopolitical confrontation. That included France, that included Egypt, that included United Arab Emirates. All these countries sided with Greece during the geopolitical posturing over the Eastern Mediterranean. The question was, we have this basically expanding set of crises that we are discussing. So it's not the crisis, it's many crises in the region. I think several systemic level changes was very crucial in this crisis. One of them is the role of the US. The role of the US has become extremely negative during this crisis, or particularly during the Trump era. Because during the Trump era, not only the US downsized its regional footprint, previously the US many times stepped in to decrease the tension between Turkey and Greece. The most obvious case in point was in 1996 during the Kardak crisis. What was in English, the Kardak? Anyway, during the Kardak crisis. And in recent years, not only the US has downsized its regional footprint, but the nature that it has done was so disorderly. Effectively, the Trump sent a message: if you can do anything by force, and as long as you're on good terms with me, you can go ahead. And that message was received by everyone, including Turkey as well too, including many other actors in the region. And that's why you see, like, you know, particularly from 2016 onward, there was many geopolitical confrontation taking place in different parts of the regions as well. So the power vacuum, and then the signal, and then the message the US was sending. The second systemic factor was the EU dimension, because the honeymoon in Turkish-Greek relation previously took place against the backdrop of an improving Turkish-European relations. And we are right now more and more discussing Turkish-EU relation, Turkish-Greek relation, with no reference to Turkish-EU membership aspirations. Because in the end, previously for Turkey to improving the relation with Greece, to address some of the troubles in the relation, meant to be clearing the way for its European journey. The fact that now there isn't much left of the European journey on the ground, the fact that the Turkish-European relation more and more being, you know, confined, largely, not exclusively, confined to three topics: migration, geopolitics, and radicalism, that basically the disappearance of the European framework in Turkey-Greek relations has been extremely menacing for this relationship, has been extremely negative for this relationship. And we saw this, and now we see this clearly on Turkey's approach to Cyprus. In 2004, Turkey wanted the Cyprus question to be resolved because it would have meant several things. A, that would have taken another obstacle in Turkey's journey on its EU accession process, and would have taken an obstacle in its overall relation with Greece. And therefore, back then, Turkey was actually willing to make some negotiation, some concessions as well too. And then that's how the referendum was also accepted by the Turkey side. But the defeat of the referendum meant several things for Turkish-European relations. A, from now onward, there would be a structural obstacle for Turkey's EU journey, because both Cyprus was going to be an EU member with many unresolved questions. So in any room at the EU level where the decision will be made, the Cyprus will be in the room with many unresolved set of the questions with Turkish Cypriots and with Turkey as well too. So in a sense, the admitting of Cyprus without resolution to the Cyprus crisis created a structural obstacle in Turkish-European relations. I mean, obviously we can add the political obstacle of back then, people like Cyprus, etc. But that's beside the point now. Now where we are, I think on the one hand there are things, the positive things that one can point to it, and there are negative things one can point to as well too. By nature, I'm a positive person, so I cannot be disappointed, or I cannot be negative for more than 20 minutes. So let me first start with the positive one. The positive one, there is some level of systemic restoration, which means that, which will mean that Turkey will take this into account while charting its next policy in these areas, which means there is convergence between the US and Europe on the Eastern Mediterranean, on Turkey, and then there is convergence between the US president and the US institution, because let's not forget, during the Trump, there was two-level divergence. A, there was a divergence between the Trump and the US institution. B, there was a divergence between the US and then Europe. And that meant more room for maneuver for many actors. Now there is convergence on these two levels. And that means the cost of escalation is going to be higher for Turkey. And on the top of it, there is an economic crisis, and then an increase in the continuation of the crisis in Eastern Mediterranean or so will put more pressure on the economy as well too. So these two factors can be seen as factors that can, push for de-escalation, and we already see the de-escalation. We are not discussing the Turkey sending the Oruç Reis to the contested waters. That has been quite a while ago, etc. But on Cyprus, I think the trajectory is still more towards the two-state solution that I see. This two-state solution, perhaps we might see a gradual process in this regard, but the fact that the UN process is really not producing much, the fact that there isn't much progress in overall Turkish, overall Cyprus questions, I think that is increasing the likelihood, that is increasing the willingness of those in Turkey that more and more argue for the two-state solution. And this is not only Erdogan. So I think the coalition that will support for a two-state solution is much larger. It's larger. It includes nationalist element. It will include the part of the Kemalist establishment, so meaning the part of the CHP of today, and it includes the current government as well too. Right now, the cost of the two-state solution is obviously too high, because that means the whole framework of Turkish-European relationship will be affected by this. The Turkish-Western relationship will be affected by this. So therefore, the risk calculation will be ongoing as well too. But the overall direction that I see is more and more going towards the two-state solution, unless something drastic happens. So on this happy note, I can stop.
Thank you, Galip. Before I continue, of course, you listeners, you're also invited to participate in the discussion. Just raise your hand or just write short notice and I will highlight you then. I would like to go on a more constructive side, because we have just now described a lot of problems and obstacles. But of course, Galip, you also indicated you're an optimist, and the fields you're working in, you're trying to find ways to actually make something happen. So this is something that I want to follow up with Ilke to this question. What kind of approaches, also explicitly different approaches maybe, would you suggest taking, and maybe also highlighting the relevance of the thing? Why is it important to do something? What is the price of not doing something and just let this supposedly frozen conflict just like simmer on? So why would you argue we should definitely work to get some results there, although we saw so many disappointment in the last years and decades?
Yeah, this is definitely the question that we should all think about and come up with ideas for, because there are so many stumbling stocks in Turkey-EU relations, and for me the Cyprus issue is a very important dossier among them. And the EU has this intention of leaving things aside until they are in a crisis mode. So we knew, as I said, like we knew this two-state solution proposal will come since the election of Ersin Tatar, even before that. We knew that if there is no comprehensive solution to the Cyprus problem after the failure of Annan Plan in 2004, failure of Crans-Montana talks in 2017, there will be a search for another alternative solution. And we also knew that the importance of Cyprus has been increasing for Turkish president and Turkey's foreign policy, because we should also underline that all these tensions in the Eastern Mediterranean have shown that and having some kind of presence in an island in the Mediterranean is a very important thing for the Turkish president. So that we knew this was coming, but we don't have, we being anyone that are working on these issues, by the way, not necessarily an alternative solution. But what has been done by the Republic of Cyprus and supported by the European Union because of the principle of solidarity was rejecting two-state solution. But all the other plans that were offered by the United Nations were not necessarily moving forwards, also because of the Republic of Cyprus anyway. So what I see here is a kind of deadlock, And kind of for going out of this deadlock, even if it's very unpleasant for the international community and the European Union, the Turkish side came up with a plan. Not that I am supporting the plan, but this is the reality on the ground now. So for me, this, first of all, the acknowledgement of this reality on the ground is quite important. And then I will a bit repeat my policy proposals or work on them as I have done in my initial remarks. This is the time that the European Union gets more and more in dialogue with the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. Because one problem, and one important problem has been, is that that side of the island is kind of under pressure from the European Union and from Turkey. And right now it's very much dependent on Turkey. But let me tell you one thing. I think history is quite important here. Before 2000s, there was this pressure on the Republic of Cyprus for resolving its territorial conflicts before getting into the Union. I think we shouldn't forget that, and Ronald might comment on that even further. This was already there, and I think they were there, without being so long on this, I think they were already intentions of doing so, but this didn't work out well with Rauf Denktaş heading the Republic of Northern Cyprus. And in 1999 Helsinki European Council, it was already stated, when Turkey was named a candidate country, by the way, it was already stated that the Republic of Cyprus, when its accession negotiations are over, may become a member state without resolving its territorial disputes. So this was kind of the end of the European leverage or European pressure over the Republic of Cyprus. And then everything has happened afterwards, and we came to this point. So if the European Union does not necessarily have the upper hand in this debate, if they don't work with Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, if they don't work with bicommunal groups that are looking for reunification, if they don't come up with a plan, I think I agree with Galib on that regards. Like, not right now, but the only plan that is on the table, even if its cost is super high for Turkey, is the two-state solution. Either you put another plan on the table, another proposal on the table. This can be the United Nations, this can be the European Union, this could be other groups in the Republic of Cyprus and Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. Grassroots plan, not necessarily imposed from leaders from top to down. This is the solution that is on the table, and this is how the debate is going to be. In September, we will see another United Nations meeting, another intention to have this on the table. And otherwise, at least for me, this is going to be very much discussed on the table, and this is going to be very much on the table and discussed further. So if there's an intention to move ahead, the way is not just like keep on repeating this bicommunal, bifederal zone plan without creating support for that inside the islands and in both communities. I hope this answers your question, but I think there's so much role to play for the European Union and other member states that would like to play a role in the Mediterranean, because we have seen, for example, the Cyprus issue being on the agenda of MED9 meeting led by Macron in the coming weeks as well. So if France, Spain, Italy, if they would like to help or mobilize resources towards a solution, I think this is definitely the time.
Thank you, Ilke. Ronald, you're the German in this round of panelists. So of course, as we're speaking about different states, we have to talk, of course, about Germany, not only because Ursula von der Leyen, your commission chief, is German, but also of these very multifaceted relations. So what is your feeling? Should Germany take a more proactive role in the absence of a coherent EU stance policy? And also, given that we are facing now elections, maybe a new government, do you think that this would be a focus of a new German government, or is there no stomach at all to get tangled up in those issues, or maybe is this actually a conflict that German foreign policy could, present something positive, especially in light of recent failures in German foreign policy? What's your impression on German role?
That's a wonderful question, and a very challenging question, because Germany in this conflict zone has two hats. It has the hat of a major power in the European Union, and it has the hat of a national government of a very powerful European country. And the dichotomy of this is something which I'm fascinated and I'm really wanting to look in much closer. What we know is that there is a history of what we call in Germany Alleingänge, of German, should I say, solo appearances. They are not always very popular in the European Union, but we had a very, very clear Alleingang of German crisis management last year in the East Med, where the German foreign minister was coming to Athens and was going to Ankara. And he was, of course, always saying, listen, I'm also a European, but in his back was a German flag, and he was talking as a German politician. So this is clearly the case. Germany is doing this also for the reason that she has privileged relationships to Mr. Erdogan. Particularly the parting chancellor is one of the few Western leaders who still enjoys Erdogan's respect. This is something we simply have to acknowledge. She will be missed in this context. And then the Germans are also very, very well represented in Greece, so they have leverage there. I want to qualify, and I do this with all respect, Galip Bey, what you said regarding, if I quote you correctly, sir, the disappearance of the European dimension in Greece-Turkish relations. I would say it's a rephrasing, and it's a rephrasing to the detriment of the Turks. While in former years, there was really, if you look at this in the Turkish perspective, the price of a possible membership in the EU, this has been downgraded now to simply having better relations, having acceptance of the positive agenda. Because Mrs. von der Leyen says, listen, if you don't behave correctly, and she uses these words in the Eastern Mediterranean, there will be no talk on any positive agenda, and that will be more isolation for the Turks. And it's very interesting. And this has been very critically discussed also in the Turkish media. And this, from a Turkish perspective, is of course a degradation. There is no talk of a Turkish membership. If you look at the German party's election manifestos, there's nobody who is mentioning this. There's actually a big majority for actually not continuing the accession talks. So this is a very, very bad situation if you believe in the importance of a European perspective of Turkey. I want to answer very briefly, Robert, the question you said, how to move on. And for this, it is important to ask, why should we move on? I mean, Cyprus has been divided since 1974. This is a very provocative question. There's been no killing, there's been no shooting. If you compare Cyprus to Syria, if you compare it to Somalia, if you compare it to many crisis spots, it's kind of peaceful. But it's what Greeks might say, the peace of the graveyard, in the sense it's a lot of inequality and injustice there. And what Ilke said before, it's a matter of territorial integrity and the rule of law if you want international relations. So there is a point there. There is a point. But why is there no movement? There is no movement because what we call in German, die Normativität des Faktischen, the normativity of the actual situation. One must be honest, there is not really on both sides at this stage a strong political will to overcome division, neither on the Greek side nor on the Turkish side. Also in Athens and in Ankara, I cannot see this will. And this is also due to the fact that this is all combined to the whole imbroglio of Greek-Turkish relations. Galip described all the various layers and features of these relations very, very correctly, and they're all connected. While the Cypriots are talking, the Athenians and the Ankara people are listening very carefully and giving advice and say, don't do this, don't do that, because this will affect the balance between the two countries. One point to wrap up. The two sides have come very closely to an agreement. The beauty from an academic perspective of the Cyprus issue is that it's very transparent. All the negotiations are well recorded, and the minutes of these records are public. They are public due to an effort also of the European Union, which is supporting initiatives by civil society to make this process transparent. So you can all study this. It's a long, long list of papers you have to read, but it's all out there. Now, if you look at this carefully, we'll see that they have been very close to an agreement, the two sides. And they're moving, and that's when I said it's Hamenes Efkerias, it's lost occasions. And the stumbling block in the end is two words, and this is political equality. Even the most flexible and the most, should I say, anti-Erdogan Turkish Cypriots would insist on political equality. And the Greeks have issues with this, because they say, hey, listen, we're 80% and we give you equality, you're only 20%. You're a minority, they don't say it, but you're a smaller community. So there we'd have to put much more emphasis on discussing what political equality mean. We as Europeans, maybe as Germans, but also as Europeans, we could see where these systems work. Maybe I remember when I was a young scholar, we looked at this, the Swiss model and so on. This is one thing. And maybe a final word, civil society. That's a very simple way of always saying, oh, it's civil society to solve problems. No, but in the end of the day, and there I would say the Europeans have been rather successful. They have kept the spirit of the principle of a unified Cyprus alive. And this in itself is an achievement after so many years of division. And this is something we should continue working on and supporting, because in the end of the day, that's my personal conviction, if you want to solve the overreaching Greek-Turkish issue, you will not do this if you don't solve the Cyprus issue. So therefore, it's something which is a big issue, and Europe is interested in it and should be working on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronald. We just talked about like the positive benefits of a successful peace process. Now, Galip, I remember in our interview we spoke about these pull factors, especially what the EU has to offer. Now, do you think that going forward the EU should bank on that, on values and also prosperity? And what do you think also with the view to Greece, which has been very hard hit and not treated in a way that many Greeks feel now favorable to the EU? How has that changed the dynamics and like the persuasive leverage of the EU in terms of morals and benefits to work from? And do you think that could go back to that? Is that the EU's strongest leverage to offer really a perspective of prosperity and equality?
Well, thank you. I mean, obviously, there has been many capital lost in perhaps like both Greek EU and Turkish EU dimensions as well too. But at the same time, there is still not really much alternative to the EU for both countries. Economic interests, security interests, many level of interest. So yes, I mean, there is the strains in Turkish-European relations are obvious. The Turkish-European relations has been downgraded in almost every aspect of it, but Turkey could not replace this with another set of the relationship that could have provided a similar benefit. So in this regard, the EU still, the presence of EU in itself is still an appealing dimension, maybe not for politicians, but for the society. And if you look at the polls, the EU, the support for EU is quite high. It's not because these people believe that Turkey will be a member of the Europe or EU or anytime soon. I think vast majority of them, the one that express support for Turkey's European process do believe that this will not happen. But the journey in itself is worthwhile because the journey in itself could be to some extent transformative. So the EU, the support for EU to some extent means return to normalcy, avoiding this, the authoritarian turn, or etc., or avoiding this economic crisis. So in this regard, yes, there is still a lure out there, but we have to be also realistic as well too. Europe has to be realistic with its leverage, particularly given the fact that usually Europe right now doesn't want to bear much cost. Here I'm talking about the broader Eastern Mediterranean, not only Turkish Greek or this Turkish-Cyprus crisis. That the EU seems to be once resolved without bearing a high cost. And unfortunately, attaining results without limited cost might not be very feasible. And in this regard, I think the EU right now should focus on the crisis management. The crisis resolution is not something on the horizon, and it's not going to be on the horizon anytime soon. I mean, here it's not political disputes; it's sovereignty disputes. It's not the disputes over certain issue. It's fundamentally about the two different projections of the sovereignties. And compromising, when you frame something in the language of sovereignty, compromising on it is inherently difficult and politically not very feasible. And I don't see the political leadership, particularly, I don't know much on the Greek side, because I cannot read the Greeks, but I assume the same will be the case in Greece as well too. But certainly when you frame something in the language of sovereignty, then making compromises becomes quite difficult. And this is the danger, the discursive entrapment that we see in Turkish-Greek relationship. Everything is framed in the language of sovereignty, and everything is basically has been framed that way for a long time. And now at the end of the day, you have to make some compromises. And this is why the bilateral Greek-Turkish crisis or Greek-Cypriot crisis needs to be couched in within a larger framework in which the compromises can be palatable. Because bilateral compromises is now much more difficult, because it will be seen as if you are giving into the other side if you do it in the bilateral way. But if this becomes a part of a bigger deal, then you can frame this differently. And that's why I think we have to situate the Turkish-Greece, Turkish-Cyprus issue within a larger European vision for its neighborhood, for the Eastern Mediterranean. And there, whether it's the the green energy transition, whether it's whatever, some form of regional dialogue, whatever, but something has to be, the scope of this negotiation has to be a bit enlarged. So it has to have a two-track. Obviously, at the core of it, it will be a Turkish-Greek and Turkish-Cypriot track. I mean, Cypriot track. But this track should be situated within a larger track, which should be something like European vision for the Eastern Mediterranean or for its southern neighborhood in one way or another. Because the concession that will be required in this first track needs to be framed through this second track for them to be politically palatable and sellable to the public. Otherwise, I don't see the leadership in both sides who would take the level of political capital, who would take the level of political risk and invest the necessary capital in any progress on this crisis. Can frozen conflict go for long? Yes, it can. I mean, but this frozen conflict has also a habit of being defrozen at certain stages. Look at the Kashmir. I mean, if I'm not wrong, I think the UN mission in Cyprus is one of the longest in the world, perhaps after the Kashmir. So Can it go for another decade? Yes, it can. But we might also find out that it might not be able to go for another decade. So if one of the actors decides to increase its capacity for risk taking, and we saw this partially in Nagorno-Karabakh. I mean, it has been there. It has been there has been some form of a frozen conflict for more than 3 decades until it was defrozen. Yes, I mean, the situation in Greece, Cyprus, Turkish Greece, etc., is significantly different. I do recognize this. But also, I think we should not underestimate the actors' propensity for risk-taking down the road. And this is where I see actually at some stage, particularly from the Turkish side, the willingness to take the risk to change the status quo. And that changing of status quo will have major implication on the broader Turkish-European and Turkish-Western relations.
Thank you, Galay. Speaking of willingness to take a risk, Una, a few weeks back, you published a very interesting piece on Turkey's calculations in Afghanistan. Now, I want to use this opportunity to enlarge on our view a bit and just very briefly, if that's possible, look at how what we are seeing in changing realities in Afghanistan is affecting the topic that we were discussing now. So the question goes to all of you, in what respects does these events in Afghanistan, the Taliban takeover of the government, how is that perceived in the region we are discussing now? And is that actually seen by Turkey, for example, more as a challenge or more as an opportunity to kind of enlarge its own position vis-a-vis the European Union?
You want me to start?
Yes.
Okay, maybe I should use the opportunity to advertise your magazine and your website. We were actually agreeing that I write a piece. Yes, but it was to be a piece which would appear in the printed version, and then I sat down over a weekend and did the studies, and then I wrote it, and I called you next day and said, no, we cannot wait with this being published for another 2 weeks. And well, this was a wise decision because it would be obsolete. The status then was Turkey's efforts to get a foothold into the Kabul airport issue, and also Erdogan wanting to meet the Taliban leaders, and all this has been, of course, thrown apart. What does the Afghan crisis mean for Turkey? I mean, this is a commentary in the Daily Sabah, which everybody who wants to understand how the Ankara government is, you should read, is Burhanettin Duran. He is a very, very smart guy. He's 100% Erdogan follower. And he says 2 sentences I have underlined. Turkey wants to make a diplomatic contribution to preventing civil war after the US withdrawal. And Turkey wants to become a trusted mediator and stabilizing force. So here, all people are leaving, and Erdogan makes it very clear, and this is a chance for us to jump in. So this is what I see in the commentary. This is what I hear between the grapevines here in Turkey. The Ankara government is proactively trying to put a foot in, and they want to somehow increase. This is typically Erdogan. He wants to be perceived as an international leader who's in the position to actually help solve the problems. Often he's creating them himself, but he wants to be considered equal with people like Putin and Biden and all the other big guys. Whether this will work out, I don't know. This is a big issue here. Come with this, the issue of the migration. This is the #1 issue these days, the domestic issue in Turkey. There are many people who are very concerned about a new inflow of immigrants and refugees from Afghanistan. It's interesting that the opposition is actually working with partly racist arguments against them. And it's very interesting that it's the AKP, which we in Western Europe as liberals have problems with, are actually holding up liberal principles of hospitality and Willkommenskultur, as we say in Germany. So this is a very strange situation. But come 2023 and come the elections, be ready for a very, very ugly discussion about foreigners and the role of foreigners in domestic politics and beyond. One word, and this is my final word before I hand over to Ilke. How is this perceived in Greece? Greece, I must say, is one step further away from Afghanistan, and that plays a role in these discussions. The further away you get, kind of the better, the less you are affected by the migration. This is the very simplistic calculation. The Greek commentary, I follow very closely the Greek media these days, has two main concerns. The one is the concern of a repetition of 2015, when the Hellenic Republic was affected that Mr. Erdogan will suggest, listen, I will help you guys, Biden and so on, with solving this issue, but for this you have to support me in my bilateral issues with the Greeks. And this is voiced very, very clearly in Greek commentary. So therefore, again, you have the Greek-Turkish nexus in the Afghan crisis seen from Athens. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ronald. Ilke? Hello? Wait.
The Greek-Turkish relations, the migration dimension, even if we do not necessarily know the dimensions of this issue right now, like we don't know it will end actually. I just want one issue on the table, and this about the credibility of the NATO, the US. And as Ronald said, offered to stay to protect the Kabul airport and allies embassies after the withdrawal as well. So it is inside this, and it also used the country, the leadership of Turkey also used this opportunity to improve relations with the US, because there are so many bilateral problems between Turkey and the US, and this is kind of fell apart after the current developments. As Ronald said, now that the Turkish government and the pundits close to the government are trying to reframe them for like avoiding a civil war in Afghanistan, etc. But this dimension has fallen apart. So I'm really curious about how the questions related to the international positioning of NATO missions and the U.S. leadership when it comes to the Middle East, etc., will affect Turkey's role in NATO and Turkey's relations with the U.S. in a broader sense. So clearly, this is a part of the broader picture. But in addition to the leverage that Ronald mentioned related to refugees, this is the other dimension that I'm seeing, the impact of all this on Turkey's role in NATO and Turkey-US relations in a broader sense. Thank you.
Yeah, Galip, you already unmuted yourself.
Sure. Sure. Well, I think, Ronald and Ilke already touched upon many dimensions. So we are basically speaking of 4 dimensions right now while discussing the Turkey, Afghanistan, and then the Western triangle. The first one is obviously the security of the Kabul airport. And that is a work, that is a story mainly between Turkey and the US. And then the motivation behind this story is basically Turkey and Erdogan want to monetize with Biden because there are many unresolved files on their bilateral agenda. So the motivation is more political and personal than geopolitical and strategic. So that's first. I think the geopolitical and strategic story will come once we make the political decision afterward. The second story is the migration story. And there I think the EU story should come into the picture as well too. The projection are that there will be a quite large scale of migration as we go forward. And that this migration will be first going to neighboring countries, obviously, like, you know, Pakistan, Iran, etc., and through Iran to Turkey, and Turkey is the gate to their gate to Europe, and that requires perhaps, like, you know, better coordination of policy between Turkey and the West. The third one is what Turkey attempted to do, but has failed to do so thus far, which was basically building up on the Doha talks between the Afghan government and Taliban for these intra-Afghan talks, and bring these talks to Turkey. And well, there is two developments there. First, there is no longer the Afghan government that we referred to in the previous sense. The government has left the country. So now what we previously discussed as the Afghan government and Taliban has become the same. Taliban has become the government. But the question is, will Taliban put in place an inclusive government, or will Taliban basically say the military victory means a political hegemony? Because that too will mean different things for the story. But in any case, Turkey previously wanted to host the intra-Afghan talks in Turkey, which was encouraged by the US as well too, but Turkey has failed to do so because the Taliban did not want to come for these talks. The Taliban thus far is resisting Turkey's different attempts. And the fourth dimension is the Taliban. So in Afghanistan, is Afghanistan yesterday going to be its tomorrow? Because are we going to see once again Taliban doing all these things that it used to do prior to 2001, you know, the stoning of the women, chopping off the hands, or, you know, summary executions? Are we going to see those kind of things first? Secondly, are we going to see the Afghanistan being once again a breeding ground for the international terrorism or radicalism? And then C, is the Taliban going to be open for an inclusive government that will include the actors other than Taliban, or are we going to see Taliban being just the political hegemons? Unfortunately, right now, what I see, the Taliban sending out the message of respecting the international status quo in order to be able to do what it wants domestically. Thus far, what you see with Taliban, basically sending very positive message towards China, towards Russia, towards Iran. I mean, obviously with Pakistan, they don't need to even send a message, etc., and towards US. But the question would be what Taliban is going to do inside the country, because it already declared that it's soon going to declare the Islamic Emirates in Afghanistan. And if this happens, and if the Taliban goes once again what it did in late 1990s, that will mean another huge flow of refugees. That will mean risking more and more domestic discontent, if not civil war, because the Taliban today come to rule a population that has experienced 20 years of some form of openness, some form of middle class, some form of connectedness to the world. So submitting, like ruling over this population would be more difficult today than it was 20 years ago. So we might see down the road, if Taliban is not going to show a bit more political realism or a bit more pragmatism, I mean, thus far their messaging has been, you know, as if they are going to show to some extent some form of this pragmatism, which I'm quite skeptical. That means that we are going to see many different waves of the refugees that will come from Afghanistan. And this story requires actually the Turkish Western engagement should not only confine itself to the protection of the Kabul airport or refugees. It has to have a broader dimension, taking into account what is going internally. And I think maybe there should be some form of a meeting. Previously, Abdullah Gül used to convene the countries bordering Afghanistan, a meeting between the countries bordering Afghanistan, maybe a European meeting with this group of countries to see what can be done. But in any case, the Afghanistan story will be, from the refugee dimension, a talking point in Turkish-European relationship, from the security of the Kabul airport or other things, a Turkish-US talking point. But the question is really the Kabul airport still on the table? Because when this discussion took place, well, the Kabul was not in Taliban's hands. So now the question will be, the question for Turkey has to get the buy-in of Taliban to be able to perform this role. And I don't think that the Taliban will give this buy-in easily. Even if they do, they would want a corresponding concession from Turkey. For instance, maybe asking Turkey to let Taliban to open an office in Ankara. Because right now what Taliban strives for is the international normalization and recognition. So it would love to have a NATO member. It would love to have an office in a NATO member country. I think that's why the Turkey doesn't like the idea, but I think it would be on the table as we go forward.
Thanks, Galip. We are well past our originally intended time. I would like to thank all the three of you for your valuable contributions. I think we covered a lot and even more. The more general, historic, and the very up-to-date topics. I would like to thank all of you for finding the time in these times. I hope to see you soon in person. Honestly, I would like to have these kinds of discussion in person again. The same goes for the audience and for all of you who listen to that and who like what we are doing with Dennis and the Canon Foundation, bringing together expert and exchanging opinions and also constructive approaches. I just posted a link here. You can support us by, of course, becoming a member of the Zenith Club and be a subscriber if you read German, and you can also then enjoy this wonderful magazine. And yeah, with that, I would like to close out the round, and I hope to see you all very soon.
Well, thank you very much. It was a very nice conversation, and I learned a lot from the other colleagues. So thank you.
Galip, I'm particularly happy. I knew Ilke before from our foundation, but I'm happy to meet you, Galip, and I hope we will have a chance to somehow interact more regularly.
Yeah, no, it would be great. Unfortunately, right now I'm in London, but we can do Zoom if you want.
Why unfortunately? What's so bad about London? I would never say unfortunately. I'm in Istanbul anyway, but okay.
No, I mean,
I know what you want to say. Unfortunately for our relationship, otherwise we'd have a cup of tea next door in the afternoon. So
yes,
it was great to see you guys.
I mean, in person in the fall. So I hope to see you in person in the fall. But
yes, sir.
Otherwise, happily we can do a Zoom together.
Yes, and Robert, thank you also for bringing us together, and all the best, and take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.